The town of Duskfall had one physician, one blacksmith, and one opinion about orcs, and the opinion was unanimous. So when the great gray horse came down the main street at dusk, carrying a rider who sat too still in the saddle, every door on the block eased shut in the same quiet instant. Every door but one. Doc Mercer Hollies was 62 years old and had spent the last 20 of them in Duskfall, where the winters lasted 5 months and the pay arrived irregularly, and the people came to his door when no one else would have them. He had treated trappers with frostbitten hands, a farmer with a broken jaw no one admitted causing, and a woman who arrived at midnight with a story he never repeated to a soul. He was not a man who turned toward drama. He was the sort of man who simply opened his door. He opened it now. The rider was an orc woman, tall, green-skinned. Her dark braids wound back from her face with a traveler's practicality. She wore a war judge's sash across her chest, the kind that meant her words settled disputes in clan territory, and her presence kept blades sheathed. She was also, unmistakably, hurt. She sat the horse with the rigid economy of someone who had been holding herself upright through will alone for a long time, and that will was running out. She didn't ask for help. She looked down at the old doctor standing in his doorway with his lamp in his hand, and she said with some effort, "I need a stable for my horse." "You can have that," Mercer said. "Come inside first." "I have never needed a doctor." "I can see that," he said. "You've done very well. Come inside." She came inside. She made it as far as the examination table before she stopped pretending. He had to steady her arm she let him, which told him more than the wound had. When he got her coat off, he found the arrow wound 3 inches below her left shoulder blade, dressed with a field poultice that had done its job 3 days ago and nothing since. The infection was serious. The fever was worse. "How long?" he said. 4 days on the road." He didn't say anything to that. He just got to work. She was not an easy patient. She answered his questions in the clipped, precise manner of someone accustomed to giving testimony and receiving none, and when he asked her to lean forward, she did it without complaint but with a dignity that made it clear she was cooperating with the procedure, not yielding to him. He understood the difference and respected it. He didn't talk at her. He brought clean water and clean linen and a lamp close enough to see clearly, and he worked with the unhurried attention he brought to every difficult thing. The same steadiness he'd used for 40 years, from his first practice in a river town to this one at the edge of nowhere. Her name was Veth Aaron. She told him that when he asked it for his records, and then she said, "You don't recognize the sash." "I recognize it," he said. "War Judge, Eastern Territories. I've had 2 of your colleagues pass through. One had a horse with a cracked hoof, and the other had a chest cold he refused to name a chest cold." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Did they recover?" "The hoof took 2 weeks. The cold was gone in 4 days, once he stopped arguing with me about whether it existed." This time she did smile, briefly, and then her face went careful again, which told him that smiling freely was not something she was accustomed to doing in the presence of strangers. He noted that and moved on. The fever climbed that night. He had expected it. Pulling the infection properly would spike it before the body could settle, and he sat with her through the worst of it, checking the wound, replacing the poultice, giving her willowbark tea and the stronger tincture when it was needed. She slept in pieces, waking each time with the reflexive alertness of someone trained to wake fighting, and each time she found him at the table across the room, reading or trimming the lamp or simply sitting, not hovering, just there. By the 4th waking, she stopped reaching for the knife that wasn't at her hip. "You should sleep," she said. Her voice was rougher with the fever but steadier than it had any right to be. "I will," he said. "I'm going to check your temperature first." "You've checked it 4 times. "I'll check it a 5th. That's what fevers require." She looked at him for a long moment. Not the way people looked at him when they were deciding whether to trust him, more the way they looked at something they couldn't quite place, something that didn't fit the category they'd prepared. "Why are you here?" she said. "In this town, you're not a frontier man." "I came from a river town about 40 years ago," he said, taking her temperature with the practiced ease of a man who has done it 10,000 times. "I had a practice there. My wife was from here, from the valley, I mean. When she passed, I had the practice and nothing else tying me to the river, so I came here. That was 20 years ago." "And you stayed?" "The people needed a doctor. A thing that needs doing and has someone to do it. That's usually enough reason to stay." She was quiet for a moment. The lamp shifted in a draft from the window and the light moved across her face. "I have ridden through 11 frontier towns in the last 3 months," she said, "adjudicating a boundary dispute between 3 clans and 2 human settlements. Every town has been watchful when I arrive." "People are afraid of what they don't know," he said. "They are afraid of what I am," she said, with no bitterness in it, just the evenness of someone who has looked at a fact long enough to stop flinching from it. "That is different." "It might be the same thing," Mercer said. "People are afraid of you because they don't know you. They know what they've heard or what they've imagined. They don't know that you ride through an arrow wound for 4 days without complaining, or that you smile when something is actually funny, or that you notice when someone isn't sleeping and tell them to go to bed." He paused. "Those things take knowing." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. "Sleep," Veth Aaron said at last. "I'll be here in the morning." He slept. She was there in the morning. The fever broke on the second day, a clean break, the wound draining properly, her temperature dropping back to something manageable by mid-afternoon. When he checked her shoulder that evening, the healing was exactly what he'd hoped for. "You can ride in 4 or 5 days," he said, "with care." She nodded. There was nothing in her face to read, and then there was a faint contraction, quickly smoothed. "The boundary adjudication," she said. "I have 3 settlements waiting." "I know, 4 days. Then you can ride and you won't reopen the wound. And you won't arrive somewhere unable to do your work." She looked at him with that same unplaceable expression. "You are very certain of your opinions," she said. "I've been a doctor for 40 years. I've earned the opinions." 4 days, she said. It wasn't agreement exactly. It was the decision of a woman who weighed things carefully and had weighed this one. She stayed. He had a spare room that had been his daughter's before she grew up and moved 2 valleys north, and Veth Aaron occupied it with the same contained practicality with which she did everything. She was not, it turned out, a woman who rested easily. She was at his table by morning each day, reading through the case documents she carried in her saddlebags, marking passages with a worn-down pencil, occasionally making a sound of quiet frustration that meant she'd found something in the testimony that didn't align. On the second morning, he brought her coffee and set it at her elbow without interrupting, and she glanced at it, glanced at him, and said, "Thank you," in the particular tone of someone who means it in more than one direction. "You're making marks in the margins," he said. "The testimony from the 3rd settlement contradicts itself. The timber rights claim relies on a survey that was done before the creek shifted, which means the boundary markers are in the wrong position, which means the human settlers are technically in the right, but the Orc clan has been farming that land for 60 years. She paused. "It's a difficult case. What will you decide?" She looked at him as though considering whether to answer. "I will find the path that keeps the most people in their homes," she said. "That is always the decision. The law tells you who is right. A war judge finds the path that the most people can live with, so that no one is standing in a field with a grievance and a blade in 20 years. Mercer poured himself a cup of the same coffee and sat down. "That sounds like medicine," he said. She looked at him again, sharply this time, and then with something that was not sharpness at all. "It does," she said slowly. "I have never thought of it that way." "Cure what you can," he said. "For the rest, you find the path that keeps the most people whole." She was quiet for a long moment, her pencil still, her eyes on the documents and not on them. "I have been doing this for 19 years, she said. "I trained under the judge who trained under the judge who wrote the Eastern Territorial Codes. I have adjudicated 461 disputes, and I have never had anyone describe it to me that way." Another pause. "It's a better description than the official one." He laughed. It surprised her, he could see that, and then she laughed too, briefly, and the sound of it was warm and a little rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a while. They talked through the morning that way. He told her about 40 years of small decisions. The farmer he'd talked out of setting the wrong bone himself. The winter he'd run out of quinine and improvised. The apprentice he'd trained who now practiced 3 towns south and sent him letters with questions he couldn't always answer. She listened with the attentiveness of someone who has learned to hear everything under what people say. And sometimes she asked a question that reached exactly to the center of something he'd been circling. She was, he realized, a profoundly intelligent woman. He had known that from the sash and the documents. He hadn't known it the way you know it when someone asks you a question that reframes 40 years of your own work in a single sentence. On the 4th morning, he cleared her to ride. She packed her saddlebags with the same efficient care with which she'd unpacked them, and saddled the great gray horse herself, which he had stabled and fed, and on the 2nd day brushed down without being asked. She noticed. He saw her notice. At the gate she stopped. "I don't know how to pay you," she said. "I have coin, but it feels insufficient." "The coin is fine," he said, "though unnecessary." "Mercer." She said his name plainly, the way you said the name of someone you were being accurate about. "Unnecessary." He smiled. "Send word when the boundary case is settled," he said. "That'll be enough." She mounted, and the great gray horse moved out onto the road, and he watched her until she cleared the edge of the town, and the road bent into the tree line and he couldn't see her anymore. He went inside and washed the coffee cups and put them back on their hooks. That evening, just before sundown, he heard hooves on the road. He didn't go to the window. He set the 2nd cup back out on the table and put the kettle on. She came through the door with her saddlebag still over her shoulder and a look on her face that was not quite sheepish, because Veth Aaron was not a woman who did sheepish, but that was in the neighborhood of it. "The 3rd settlement is 2 days north," she said. "The road forks an hour out. I would not want to take the wrong fork in the dark." "No," he agreed, "that would be unwise. I will leave at first light. I'll have coffee ready." She sat down at the table, pulled the documents back out, found her pencil and went to work. Mercer sat across from her and read his book. The lamp burned between them, steady and warm, and outside the window the last light left the valley, and the stars came in one by one, the way they did every night over duskfall, over the mountains and the road and the great quiet country that neither of them had to explain to the other anymore. She did leave at first light, but she knew the road back. And all winter, the 2nd cup was always out.